Hey everybody! In today's video, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite chords of all time for writing soul and R&B. It's a trope that you hear in so many different songs across all eras, even including modern music. So here's some great examples. You probably have heard it in songs like this. Like this song. Like this one. So as you can see, this chord really has a beautiful, beautiful character to it. And this is going to be something that's really easy to implement in your music, especially if you understand your basic theory. And even if not, I'll show you some cool ideas. And if you're really lucky by applying this chord, not only will you be able to level up your music game, but you just might get invited to the cookout. Let's first look at what a dominant chord is. Essentially, if we're looking at it from a Western perspective, we can think of it very straightforward if we're excluding things like blues and non-diatonic harmony. A dominant chord generally has tension via having a tritone. And as you can hear, this interval has a tension to it, and it wants to resolve somewhere. And most of the time, it's going to resolve to the one chord, where you get a nice, beautiful resolution. Though, one thing about that tritone is it does sound uncomfortable, especially when you get into different chord voicings if you want to do like an altered dominant sound. The great thing about this chord, which is going to be a 13 sus, or you can think of its different variations. You can have like an 11 sus, a 13 sus, and there are a bunch of different ways you can even name the chord, for example. You know, you might have like a 7 sus 2, 7 sus 4. Now, if you're not really experienced in theory, don't worry about it. Like, we're just going to think of it practically. And the one thing I want you to think about is that with using a 13 sus chord, or a chord in this sort of quality, is that we are removing the third. And the third is the main point of contention within a dominant chord that wants to resolve. So you can almost think of it as a slightly smoother way of landing into your intended chord resolution, if you want to even resolve the chord. Another way we can think about it, rather than just being a 13 sus chord, is something like an F major over G. And that's a nice simple way to also understand it. The way I like to think about it is it's just a texture of many different textures you can choose from in your arrangement or chord sequence. So let's take a look at some common uses of how this chord is used within soul, R&B, and funk music. So one of the easiest ways to think about this chord is to just replace the normal dominant chord in a 2-5-1 progression, where normally we might have something that sounds like this. Do this instead. And you'll notice something about this is that the second one just feels a little bit more smooth, and it kind of has almost an ethereal quality. This chord sounds very uplifting in many different contexts, which is why I think it's used so much within soul and R&B music, because even when the topic is about something really hurtful or painful in one's life, there's generally like a bit of hope within the music. Oh yeah, one other thing. If you're enjoying this video, feel free to subscribe. If you're on mobile, there's this thing called hyping, so hype that shit up. Spam that button, and if you want to, feel free to comment down below. Let me know about your thoughts. Give it a like. If you haven't, subscribe to my channel, and also if you want to, you can always donate to my Patreon. Definitely helps a lot, but if not, I totally get it. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and let's get back into the video. Right, one cool thing about using like a 13 sus, or however you want to think about it, is there's many different ways we can think about voicing the chord. Another great thing we can do is actually use it as a sort of surprise non-resolution. So we could do something like have a 2-5-1, but what we could actually do is resolve to that suspended dominant chord, and that has its own feel. One really common trope that I love, and I use it all the time, is actually just using it as a half step up at the end of a bar or sequence. And as you can hear by having that whole step movement up, it sounds very soulful, very beautiful, and it's something I use all the time. And if you want to see that video, if you're interested in drum and bass music, you can see the video. Another variation we can hear is within Earth, Wind, and Fire with the song title, Earth, Wind, and Fire. There's actually a tonality that is very similar to this, where essentially there is a vamp between this sort of chord sequence, but rather than going up a whole step, it just goes back and forth from, one chord to the other. So one chord and then back down. Right, so if we're thinking of that Earth, Wind, and Fire sound, right, the simple vamp is so good. Right, so you can even hear just a super pretty voicing, very simple. Because this is really ambiguous, we can kind of take this progression wherever, right? We could do like a So that sounds really cool, doesn't it? I find it to be one of the most versatile dominant chords ever. I use it in most of my arrangements because I love the sound that much. Maybe I'm using it a bit too much, but I do really love it when I want a smooth sound, when I don't want it to be too challenging with using like an alter dominant or something more theory-brained, or I guess you could say more challenging to a listener. So if you're an electronic producer like me, right, we could think about it in so many different ways. So one of the most common sort of bass sequences in music is this one. Heard it everywhere. I used to use it a ton, especially before I really got into understanding theory, and it's pretty much in like every other drum and bass track, every other house track, right? You'll recognize this if you're a music producer, and you probably have used it yourself. So I think that's one of the reasons you find it so much within electronic music, and you'll hear it a ton in jungle as well, these sort of suspended chords, because they can sound very ethereal and uplifting, like I said earlier. One thing I really want to challenge you to do, other than using it, I want you to listen to music, especially soul, R&B, jazz, funk, gospel, and try to listen and see where you hear that chord being played, because it's going to pop out like a sore thumb now that you know about it, and if you're actively listening all the time, and that can give you a lot of interesting creative ways that you can think about using this chord, listening to other people's arrangements and going, oh, I never thought of using it in that context. It's something I found to be really, really beautiful. So really just think about that voicing, there's a bunch of different ways it's going to sound on a keyboard versus a guitar or whatever instrument you're playing. But that's the beauty of it. The way you choose the voicing can add a lot of interest. I find like this is the first step if you're really having trouble with getting acclimated with soul music. This is going to be an easy way to have one foot in the door to getting a more soulful sound. I find it super, super common and very important to the DNA, especially of that classic sound. Modern soul and R&B still uses it, but we tend to do it different. Modern soul and R&B still uses these tonalities, but the sort of way that things are being played has changed a bit, especially over the years. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching my video. I hope that you found it useful and that it wasn't too difficult to understand. I just really wanted to give you a practical way of thinking about it that you can immediately get into your songwriting. Of course, you can get much more theory-brained, but I feel like in this case, thinking about it more in how you can use it in context of a sentence, if we think about it like language, or also how we could just get into using it in terms of a vocabulary, right? You can not necessarily know specific theory terms, but if you start to understand the vocabulary, in a way you almost can have sort of a more intrinsic understanding of what it is. It's more intuitive rather than analytical. But however, that analytical is still very important as well. But in this case, I just want to get you up and running really quick and to inspire you to try something a bit different. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next